كم انترو حتى بتنزلهم وجمرياتي impression ناتي أبزع عبد مساعته غزريخو بأخي جمري so far Ethiopia we have this frantic development activities going on. My question is, in some countries when they go through a rapid real estate development, mostly they collapse. Are you worried that it might collapse, this great development that's going on, it might affect the economy?
No, because it does constitute a significant part of the economy. Real estate sector is growing, obviously, and not just in Addis, it's growing across the country. But it constitutes a very small part of bank loans, for example. No more than maybe 10-15% of the bank loans given by the private banks, public banks, which provide more than 50-60% of the total loan, do not provide any loan for real estate. So it will be in the range of 5-7% of bank loans. Therefore, I don't see a real estate bubble appearing. But we are keenly following that issue. In spite of the big construction activity that is going on in Addis, there is still a massive shortage of housing in this town.
Okay, there is another thing that I noticed also, a big number of hotel rooms. Where are you as far as meeting the necessity or the requirement of the tourist business is concerned? Are you over it, meeting it, or where are you? That is one question. And the second one is, I made this complaint to Minister Mahmoud when I was here last time. This is also a personal complaint. When I go to a restaurant, I pay just like what the Ethiopian pays. The same service, the same product, same price. The only place that I am segregated is in the hotels. Why am I asked to pay in dollars when an Ethiopian pays and he gets the same room, the same bed? And then it's not comparable. 200 birr, and then the moment they discovered my passport, they asked me for $40. $40 is 800 birr. Somewhere like that. So why am I paying 3 times the price of the room?
Well, on the first question, hotel space, there is a acute shortage of hotel space still. It's mainly related to conference tourism. Lots of conferences are held here in Addis. And when there are conferences, we have problem accommodating customers to the extent that we sort of block certain hotels for official delegations, and that creates havoc. So there's a acute shortage of hotel space here in town, particularly at higher end, but there is significant investment in the hotel industry happening also at higher end. 3 or 4 additional 5-star hotels are coming in, and so that should reduce the pressure. Now, the hotel business, I'm not going to justify this. I'm going to try to explain it without justifying it. Whenever I go to foreign countries, including Rome, for meetings, they tell me the rates during those meetings are much higher than the normal rates. This is even true of New York. So because the occupancy rate becomes higher during meetings, they charge higher during meetings than is the case normally. So there's a distinction in every hotel. The rates vary from time to time. Now, what these hotels in Ethiopia do is use the local customers as sort of fillers from which they don't make much money and use foreigners. And the only way they distinguish foreigners is by their passport. And if there is any consolation to your predicament, it's the fact that if you had been an American of Ethiopian origin, you would still have faced the foreign rate. It's just your passport that distinguishes you as a foreigner and nothing else. The justification behind it is that they make the real money out of the Ethiopians, that they use as sort of gap fillers, not that out of the foreign tourists. And the other justification they give are on balance. The rates here are much higher than comparable cities. But I can't justify it.
Okay. I've been visiting Addis Ababa since 1991 frequently, maybe twice a year until 2000, and then there was a lull of 8 years. And what I've been noticing is you have a great number of beggars and lepers, but every time I come, I see a decrease in the number. And especially in my observation this time, I was just amazed what is happening. Has the Ethiopian health sector improved that much to eliminate this polio and what have you? What happened?
What's happening is people who used to come from every corner of the country to Addis without any specific job or opportunity of getting a job but to engage in begging on the streets in the hope and expectation that they will be able to survive out of these alms that's given to them. A good number of them are getting alternative sources of income. We have trained some of them and engaged them in cobblestone work in the city. Some of them have gone back to their village, and the opportunities there are significantly higher now. And over time, we are beginning to institutionalize support for those who do not have the means to survive on their own. So slowly, we didn't want to take a drastic step against it because of the history. I don't know if you know the history of begging in Addis. But what used to happen when I was a student is when there was an annual meeting, this ugly face of Ethiopia would be cleaned off Addis streets for a few days, and then when the heads of state leave, they come back again. We felt this would be insulting to everybody, including the victims themselves. They assume that they are not begging simply because they love begging. It's because they don't have other opportunities. So it took a lot of time because we wanted to do it in a sort of a natural way. And that's happening across the country. Step by step, those who are unemployed but who can work for it are encouraged to be trained and given opportunities to work. Those who can go to their village are also encouraged to go to their village. And those that cannot fend for themselves in any way, then we encourage institutionalized support for them.
Okay, I have two more questions of my initial observations. As you know, sustainable economy needs proper maintenance of assets. And it's very obvious that Ethiopia is very weak when it comes to maintenance. I have seen broken windows in my first visit, and they're not repaired until now. Now the second window is broken. I know maybe you know the concept of broken window syndrome. That kind of disinterest I see from Ethiopians in general. When one screw it goes out, nobody replaces it. In a month, the second screw comes off and the whole asset is destroyed, so you have to replace it. Do you notice that?
I wouldn't be surprised if this asset happens to be a government asset.
Most probably, yeah.
I would be surprised if this asset were to be a private one. In terms of government assets, the culture is to build, use, and dispose. Maintenance has not been a major aspect of it. In recent years, we have taken steps to maintain roads, to maintain power installations and telecommunication infrastructure in general. We have specifically allocated fund for maintenance in these basic infrastructure projects. But housing is managed on the basis of its own income. Government has inherited lots of housing units. We're not building new ones except the low-cost housing. And that's transferred immediately to the owners, so they take care of it. But we still have government-owned houses that are managed by public enterprise. And because this institution has no future, it has a past, but it has no future, sooner or later it will disappear because we don't plan to own government housing indefinitely. Over time, we either bulldoze it or transfer it to the private sector. So, and there has not been this culture of maintaining this housing. So public assets are not properly cared of, especially real estate type of assets of the government. And some of it might rub off to the private sector. After all, some of the private sector have also been working in the public sector and sort of
they inherited
the culture from where they were working initially.
Okay. My last question on observations, unemployment, how severe is it and what are you doing about it? And also I noticed some shortage in foodstuff and stuff like that. Is it natural or is it something extraordinary? What happened?
In terms of unemployment, we've been perhaps lucky in the sense that rural-urban migration is extremely low. It's probably the lowest in the continent. This is partly a reflection of our focus on rural development and the land ownership system in Ethiopia. So the influx from the rural areas that traditionally created portions of unemployment in urban areas is not happening anymore. Only the educated young people from the rural areas stay behind in the urban areas after they complete their education. Most of them don't go back to the rural areas, but they have some education. So unemployment in the urban areas is much lower than it was, let's say, 5 years ago. The second reason why it's lower is because we have make work programs here, small and micro enterprise sector. We train people, young people, engage them in all sorts of public projects to give them skills, employment opportunity, and startup capital as a result of the work that they do. That has lessened the pressure, but I can only say that the pressure has been reduced. It's not removed. It's never removed. And in countries such as Ethiopia, you don't have unemployment insurance programs. So it remains to be a significant challenge, but not as big as it used to be, let's say, 5-6 years ago. What was the second point?
The second was the shortage of oil and stuff like that.
Yeah, edible oil and sugar.
Mm-hmm.
We have a tussle with the private sector who are distributing edible oil and sugar because it had been monopolized by a small group of about 5 businessmen, and they were charging exorbitant prices, what we call fence-sitting activity. And so we have had to distribute it through cooperatives, and the traditional channels of distribution had been interrupted, sugar and edible oil. So we have had some shortage in recent weeks. But it's an artificial shortage because we're now trying to restructure the distribution and retail sector. It used to be a forest where nobody knew who was who, whose income was what, and so on. Now we are requiring everybody to have a tax identification number, like a social security number. And most of our businessmen don't like it.
Well, nobody likes it.
So it's been a bit of a tussle.
Yeah, okay. I'll go now to the region. Ethiopian-Egyptian relations, that's where I would like to start. It has always been deceiving on the surface. It looked normal, but deep inside there was mutual suspicion. It's been like that historically, I guess, beginning with the Eritrean Revolution and the Nile politics and stuff like that. Now that you have an endeavor you're going ambitious projects in power generating, which you say it's not irrigation, but it's power generating. It will not affect negatively the bottom countries. How do they receive this?
Well, the advantage of being in my position is you get to access information that is not necessarily publicly available. And the first thing that I learned in my position was that this Nile issue, the debate on water distribution on the Nile issue, was really a bogus issue. It was a really bogus issue because if you were to treat the Nile basin, and the most sensitive part of the Nile basin is the so-called Eastern Nile, the Nile that goes from Ethiopia to Sudan and Egypt, because 85% of the water at Aswan comes from Ethiopia. This part of the Nile, which is supposed to have shortage of water, does not have shortage of water. It only has shortage of management. Ethiopia is structured to be the power generation center of the Nile geographically. Sudan is geographically created to be the main agricultural producer of this region. Only the delta part of Egypt is supposed to produce goods, agricultural goods. And so if you use the Nile water in a rational manner, there will not be any shortage of water. The fact is, for example, that if you build dams in Ethiopia, remove Jebel Awliya from Sudan, it's useless. It generates 17 megawatts of electricity, but expose Nile water to evaporation in unheard proportion. So you don't need the regulation of Jebel Awliya because the water will have been regulated here. And reduce the operating level of Aswan Dam. You would have enough water to irrigate more than 1 million hectares in Ethiopia and 4 to 5 billion cubic meters of additional water for Sudan, because Sudan can use that water better than anybody else. And the Egyptians themselves have a water conservation project which will end in 2017, and their plans are to save 8 billion cubic meters of water, additional water. Now, unless they want to take this water and let it evaporate in the desert, they don't have land that requires 8 billion cubic meters of water. So it's not really about water, it's about politics and power. So the problem, as I see it, is the politics of the Egyptian elite. There's a bit of racism behind it. There's a bit of colonial inheritance behind it. Colonial clerks tend to be more colonially inclined in their attitude than their masters. And the Egyptians have been, to some extent, clerks of British colonialism in Sudan. And so they inherited this British theory of the Nile serving Liverpool via Egypt. Egypt growing the cotton for Liverpool. And finally, the Nile has been this drug that has been used to hook the Egyptian people on external enemies and justify this Raguntan state, Egyptian state, which is there to protect the Egyptians vis-a-vis the Abd from the south.
Yeah.
So it's been a political instrument more than anything else. And the fact that the Egyptian edifice is beginning to crack now is allowing alternative opinions amongst Egyptians to creep through the cracks. And these alternative opinions are: why should we quarrel over some natural resource that belongs to us? Let's see if there is a rational win-win alternative. This is unheard of, but it's beginning to creep even into the Egyptian media. So I'm very encouraged by it.
How about in the future, if this thing is not rationalized, if the Egyptian elite, they want to stick to the 1929 agreement, which you just explained, and you want to irrigate this 1 million hectares, you said, in Ethiopia, would you revisit this problem again, or do you foresee that it will be solved in the meantime until you reach a stage whereby you want to develop this land?
The fact is, the Egyptians could sustain this irrational policy for a number of reasons. First, their geopolitical position was such that they could prevent Ethiopia from accessing grants, loans, and credit for projects on the Nile. They had completely shut off our access to credit, from whether it is from World Bank or Brazil or China or Europe or the United States. And so they were assured, given the poverty level in Ethiopia, that Ethiopia would not be investing anything on the Nile of such. That was the key instrument. The other instrument they had was Ethiopia itself was unstable and was not going to focus on development efforts, and it was surrounded by hostile governments. That's why Nasser went out of his way to, as it were, recruit non-Arabs into the Arab League, simply because they were in close proximity with Ethiopia. Somalia is a case in point. Now, we have reached a stage where some of these assumptions are no longer valid. We are now able to do something significant. We first started with minor projects on the Tekeze, Lake Tana. Now we are in a position to be able to finance on our own the biggest dam that can be built on the Nile in Ethiopia. We believe this is going to dismantle many illusions amongst Egyptians. We believe this is going to convince them that they cannot stop us. We believe this is going to convince them that they don't need to stop us because we are doing their job. The dams we built, we are unable to use 100% of their service because much of the service is downstream, inevitably, unavoidably. So we will show them in practice that when we build dams, these are not intended against them. In fact, these are dams that they ought to finance, at least partly, because they will benefit from them. So once we break this taboo, I believe the path will be open for a rational engagement between ourselves and the Egyptians. And by the way, on balance, the Sudanese have taken a very rational position on the Nile. On the surface, they seem to be twins in their position on the Nile. That's far from the truth.
I'm an Eritrean myself, but I just wonder, why are we a Nile basin country? What's the leverage that Eritrea has on the Nile?
No, Eritrea is a marginal player on the Nile. It's part of the Nile riparian Nile basin, primarily because of the Tekeze River. As you know, the Tekeze River, or the Atbara in Sudan, carries about 9 billion cubic meters of water. There are 1 or 2 minor rivers from Eritrea that flow into the Tekeze and maybe contribute 0.1% or so of the Tekeze, which itself is part of the Nile basin. So every stream counts. That is why technically Eritrea is a riparian country, but it's not in the meetings of the 10 riparian countries of the Nile. This is not by design. This is just because your president is not infatuated with international organizations of aid.
Okay. Now, he's never been my president, and he's not my president, Mr. Prime Minister. Sorry for the correction. The head of the Eritrean regime had close coordination and relations with both Mubarak and Gaddafi. Mubarak being his political patron and Gaddafi being his major financier. Now the two are gone. How do you think this will affect your relations vis-a-vis Eritrea? So including Somalia or other hotspots that you meet?
The thing is, Isaias needed this support from these parties to do not just their bidding, but his own internal drive. So this was a marriage of convenience. This was not Egypt and Gaddafi hiring out Isaias. This is two groups coming together on the basis of a common agenda. Egypt providing some of the diplomatic clout, some of the training and assistance, Gaddafi providing the finance, and Qatar also providing the finance. Now, what the current environment suggests is that this external support is no longer available. But that doesn't mean Isaias is going to change his color. He will seek alternative sources of financing. And by the looks of it, he's likely to look at possible mining resources within Eritrea to fill in the gaps that would be left by the discontinuation of the support that they got from abroad. So it's very unlikely to have a fundamental difference.
Now there is, according to the Eritrean regime and its operatives, the government is about to collapse. And there is unrest, defections, and all that. How true is it, and how serious do you consider this?
Well, look, according to the Eritrean regime, we have been on the verge of collapse for, 10 years now. And this 10 years happen to be, in the eyes of every neutral observer, the golden age of Ethiopia. We've been growing at double-digit rates for 7-8 years now. The country is stable from end to end. Obviously, we have our own challenge. We are still a very poor country. 7 years of growth does not mean much when you start from the bottom of the heap. But there's clearly light at the end of the tunnel, and this is visible to every Ethiopian. And you don't have to come to Addis and Ethiopia to see that. You could see it in Washington. 10 years ago, none of the meetings that we would call for would be attended by any significant number of people. The other day, in spite of massive campaign by the diaspora opposition and the Eritrean regime, so we had thousands upon thousands of Ethiopians attending our meetings and deciding to buy bonds for the construction of the dam on the Nile. So it's a very stable government. That's what every major country that has interest in the region would tell you. I think this is how they keep the illusion of succeeding in their agenda of regime change in Ethiopia.
The last time you formed your new government, there is widespread rumors, news, and stuff like that you have done with the old guard, and you have recruited a lot of young people, and that somehow has created kind of resentment among the old guards. How true is that?
It started out with my declaration that the last term would be my last term. In some ways, that was my public declaration of that intention. It was contrary to normal party procedures because it had not been sanctioned by party debate. I didn't do that by accident, but it was nevertheless not within the rules of the party. So it precipitated a debate on succession and carried out studies, several years, experience of other countries, and in the end the leadership came to a conclusion that there should be an organized withdrawal of the leadership of the Al-Mustawi, and that the best way to withdraw is while the going is good and while that leadership is still alive and able to influence policies from behind. So at that stage, this was a consensus position. Now, who goes first and who goes later? There was some debate, but it was mostly focused on when I depart. In the end, it was agreed that I would depart at the end of this term, and that would be my departure, and the team that departs with me would be the last. So everybody had to depart between at the beginning of the term and the end of the term. So it was a consensus position, and there has not been any complaint by any of those that have been retired. They are not unemployed. Some of them are ambassadors, some of them are training our leadership, some of them are working in public enterprises, and so on and so forth. So there's no complaint.
Okay, fair enough. Last year you signed an agreement with Ogaden, and there were some steps to be taken. Where have you reached on that? Are they in the federal system?
Yes, we signed agreements with two groups. One was an Islamist group, an offshoot of the Al-Ittihad al-Islami group. Their agenda, their decision was to get out of politics and integrate into the society, to business, and so on and so forth. That has been completed. And then we had an agreement with one group, one faction of the ONLF. Again, the agreement was a process of integration domestically, and for them to try and win over the rest of the ONLF, particularly in the diaspora. So I believe that the programs, the agreements are being implemented quite well.
They are in the federal system?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Ethiopia has a new neighbor, South Sudan, an additional country. I would say as if it's not confusing enough how Northern Sudan would keep good relations with both Ethiopia and Eritrea, given the situations and the political crisis. It seems that South Sudan has managed to do that. How do they do it? That's one part of the question. And the second part of the question is, some sources told me that personally Salva Kiir has appealed to you not to help the Eritrean opposition, which considers Arabs and Muslims, and why would Ethiopia do that? How true is that?
Both countries are wrong. South Sudan is not in good terms with Eritrea. Before South Sudan is born, Eritrea is beginning to destabilize Southern Sudan. Those in the know, in the region, know that, among other things, the Eritrean regime is beginning to arm a militia group led by a certain gentleman called George Attor. I am told by reliable sources that the Southern Sudanese went to Asmara to plead with the president not to destabilize them. I'm told that the response they got is a surprise stare, which is typical of the Eritrean regime. They never admit what they are doing. So the relationship between Southern Sudan and Eritrea is typical of Eritrea's relationship with everybody in the neighborhood. Salva never, ever asked me to in any way affect my policy on Eritrea, not just with the opposition, but also with the regime. He never raised any of these issues at all. And naturally, he didn't at all raise the issue of us supporting or not supporting a section of the Eritrean opposition. I don't think he knows all that much about the Eritrean opposition anyway.
We have within our editorial board, we have these two views that we cannot reconcile, and everybody's holding to his guns. Some of us believe that South Sudan is very close to Eritrea, and some of us believe not. So this is as a result of that. So I'm presenting my.
Yeah, I've seen articles in the Eritrean websites about what Eritrea could teach Southern Sudan.
Yeah, recently.
And that and the other. I think this is largely ill-informed and idle. First of all, Southern Sudan currently has no business with Eritrea. They have no border. They have no economic interaction. 10 years ago, they needed Eritrea because they needed arms. Now, if they need arms, they buy them. They can't get them from Eritrea. Southern Sudan is not the only interest for Isaias of Southern Sudan is there is a significant Eritrean diaspora in Southern Sudan, and they're doing well business-wise. The regime there is trying to suck money out of them like it does everywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, now you have considerable investments in Libyan investment in Ethiopia. I hear that some of the investments are owned by the Gaddafi family. Have you considered handing those assets to the transitional government in Libya? And what is the position of the Libyan embassy in Ethiopia? Is it standing with Gaddafi or with the transitional regime?
I understand the embassy is at least formally siding with Gaddafi. The Libyan government has bought off Shell Ethiopia. So it's now oil Libya.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only investment I know of the Libyan government or Gaddafi. It's very difficult to distinguish between the Libyan government and Gaddafi. I don't know where Gaddafi's private property starts and the Libyan government's public property ends. Now, the way we operate here in Ethiopia is twofold. First, there's the international law. Security Council has said this property, that there is sanctions on Libya. Now, that applies to Ethiopia. Secondly, there's the African Union. Sometimes we agree with them, sometimes we don't agree with them. But even when we do not agree with them, we do not believe in publicly second guessing. This we feel is part of the due that we have to pay for the fact that we host the African Union. So at this stage we have not recognized the National Council in Benghazi. We wait for the African Union to do so. Even in the case of, for example, Somaliland, where we engage with the authorities like a sovereign authority on everything except name. We have refrained from recognizing them. And we have told the Somaliland authorities they've got to get the African Union supporting them before we could recognize them. Again, in the case of Ouattara in Cote d'Ivoire, he is internationally recognized president. He wanted to change his embassy here. We recognize him like the African Union as the internationally recognized leader. But we asked the African Union if they would give us clearance, because he will be the ambassador not only to Ethiopia but to the African Union. And the African Union told us to hold on for a moment. Hopefully now they'll give us a clearance. So the way we operate here is such that we do not take initiatives on recognizing states, particularly in Africa.
Clear. Okay, to my last set of questions. Over the last 2 weeks, you made several statements regarding Eritrea. On the foreign ministry also issued some statements. Do you have troops there? How volatile is it? How serious is the situation in the border with Eritrea?
Well, it's not so much about the tense border situation. It's about the fact that we have reached a stage where our previous policy of passive defense does not work or cannot work anymore. In the past, our policy was try and follow the terrorists that Isaias was sending across the border and try neutralizing them rather than responding at the source. That was fine for two reasons. First, their target is armed opposition and terrorists was the government and government institutions, specifically military security establishment and other government entities. Now, these are what they call hard targets. You can harden them and protect them. And you can never be 100% foolproof. Some terrorist slips through the crack. You can take it on the chin and move on because these are government targets. In recent months, the targets have been shifted. The recent crop of terrorists that it has sent across the border were targeting things such as Floha, Mercato, taxis, buses. These are what they call the soft targets. And the instructions that they were given, and they were trained in around Assad. The instructions they were given in the Dankaya region where they were being trained was to change Addis into Baghdad. Now, when you have such soft targets, The only way you can protect the soft targets is at source. And so now we have to tell the Eritrean regime, if you carry out outrages in Ethiopia, then not only the terrorists that you send, but you yourself, you're going to pay. And our response is going to be proportionate. As I was saying in Parliament the other day, if they shoot a bullet at us, we shoot a bullet at them back. Now, if this forces them to stop the destabilization activity, all the better for everybody. Then the whole thing stops there. If they maintain the current state of undeclared war, but do not escalate it, we'll maintain a response that is appropriate to it. We will not escalate it either. If they escalate it to war and full-scale invasion of Ethiopia, I will do what we have always said in the past, which is this will be a second certified invasion of Ethiopia, where the proportionate response to it would be to make sure that there is not going to be a third one. So there's a shift in direction. It does not automatically mean that there is going to be war. It all depends on how Isaiah responds. If he responds by escalation and invasion of Ethiopia, then he will have war. If he responds by de-escalation, then there won't be.
My last question. Last week I was in Djibouti and I visited the port facilities, the container storage, car storage, dry cargo facility, and the town of Bilbile, where we have which is a station for Ethiopian transport workers. And I saw booming business, and I stood by the road that comes to Ethiopia, Sheikh Maktoum, I think, Sheikh Maktoum Street. And there was this heavy traffic moving on and off. How much of this do you think is lost by Eritrea?
Quite a lot. The economic prospects in Ethiopia now are such that even if we had Eritrean ports as our key ports, we would still be needing Djibouti. So while we have not given up on the hope of normalization between these two countries, Ethiopia and Eritrea, nevertheless, we are convinced that even during that normalization, Asab and Massawa and a few other ports like Gao will not just be enough. So we are now investing heavily in Djibouti. We're going to build a new railway from Addis to Djibouti. We're going to build a new railway system from the north to Tajura. A new port will be built in Tajura. In the short run, all of that business, 80% of that business, would have gone to Assab, and a small percentage would have gone to Massawa. But now it's completely diverted to Djibouti.
Can you give me some figures on?
I don't have the exact figures on the tip of my hands, but I would be surprised if the net income of the Djibouti authorities were to be less than, say, $500 million or so.
$1 billion. And you think if Eritrea would have a liberal, fair, just elected government, and Ethiopia resumed using Eritrean ports, do you think that Eritrea will gain a considerable number of this business that's lost already, regain it?
It is going to regain it precisely because the demands of the Ethiopian economy are going to go beyond the capacity of these two ports of Djibouti, Tajura and Djibouti, to take care of logistics requirements of Ethiopia. For example, we are beginning to develop the potash resources in the Afar region in Ethiopia. That's millions of tons per year that needs to be transported. Technically, the closest port to this is not even Assab, it's Diop. So you could develop the big port and transport it from there. The next biggest, in the immediate sense, the most important port would then be Assab. We're beginning to develop a metal sector in the western part of Tigray, mining sector there. The biggest port, the nearest port, is going to be Massawa, and then Diao, and then Assab. We are developing the northwestern part of the country. Sugar plantations and so on are going on there. Commercial farming is progressing there. We're currently using Port Sudan as a port. but Sabah would have been the preferable spot. So there is going to be business to go around for all the ports, and some of the Eritrean ports are going to be the preferred ports precisely because of proximity to some of those logistics centers.
Thank you.